Hello neighbor, I'm Robert Burns and welcome again to another episode of Sound Off Louisiana. Today I'm joined by Ed and Paul Shalacy. They are the owners of DJays Institute of Cosmetology, and we are filming on location. As many of you would recall, we've had numerous instances of scenarios that we have delivered to you involving the Cosmetology Board. There's been the Willie Payne situation in the manufactured Bel Air High School diplomas. We've also brought to you the Kevin Martin situation over at a public school in Lafayette, which got the attention of Channel 10, so much so to the extent that Attorney General Jeff Landry made a public announcement that he would conduct an investigation into what all has taken place in terms of unauthorized students being at that school, and perhaps even payment being made for being at that school, which would be unauthorized side payments. We've also had the Nelda Doral situation. We've had the Renetta Frazier situation. Wynn Johnson is an employee who we told you about having had sold answers to the examination. And perhaps the biggest granddaddy of them all, which is where we began our coverage of the Cosmetology Board, involved the Vietnamese manicurist situation. And for those of you who may not be longtime subscribers, that involved a federal class action lawsuit that was settled about a year and a half ago. And you know, interestingly enough, in that lawsuit, and probably one of the key things that prompted Attorney General Jeff Landry to believe it was in the state's best interest to settle the suit, is that one of the inspectors, specifically Sherry Stockstill, went into several of these Vietnamese-owned salons and commenced to filter through drawers, look through all sorts of documents. She placed the owner of the establishment into an office and told her she was not to move. She was not to leave that location for 2 hours, which is actually false imprisonment. All of the materials that she went through and looked through, plundered through drawers and whatnot, and this was on a Saturday morning, and it even told even the customers, quote, freeze, don't move. She had no search warrant for any of that material. And we're going to introduce to you some folk here today that are the owners of DJays Cosmetology Institute that, if I recall correctly, you've kind of relayed that you know, there have been some similar overtures that they would have that authority with you. Am I correct? And Paul, would you like to take over and kind of tell our viewers?
Yeah, we've had some historical issues with the board. Basically, this school is actually over 50 years old.
Okay.
My parents purchased the school in 2001. At that time, it was located on Government Street, and never had any issues, never had any problems with the board. Everything was fine. Then, in 2007, we moved to this location. We wanted to have a better facility for our students, and as soon as we moved to this location, that's when everything started.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, while we were still doing construction on the building, we weren't even open for business, we had inspectors showing up questioning us. We've been written up for things like they claim the gap between the ceramic tile and our clinic, the grout, was too big.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, now, folks, I have been given the latitude of a tour of this facility, and I'm telling you, this is a top-notch facility. You can see the office we're located in here. So you're telling me they were so nitpicky as to say that the grout in between the tiles was too wide?
Well, yeah, but under what regulation? Is that even something that they have purview over?
Just for the record, Department of Public Works had already done their inspections and had given us our occupancy.
Very good. Continue.
Yes, they wrote us up for a small mineral stain in one of our toilets.
Okay.
Noted the toilet was clean, but they wrote us up for the mineral stain.
Okay.
Again, where does that even fall into what they're supposed to be investigating or what they're inspecting? So at any rate, then in 2008, I believe it was, we had a situation where inspectors came for an inspection. Miss Debbie, my mother, was here, and she had literally just found out she had cancer.
Okay.
And was scheduled for pretty much immediate surgery for it. And the board members came in, started off just like any other inspection, you know, we're cooperating, everything's fine. And then they saw that our license was overdue for renewal, which, I mean, that's on us, yes.
Sure.
But the penalty for that is you just pay a small fee for being late.
That's the way I know it in almost every board and commission I've ever covered.
Well, they basically got on either side of my mother and just started hammering her and badgering her with questions. Like, one asked a question, they wouldn't even give her a chance to respond.
And we're talking about the lady who's just been diagnosed with cancer, correct?
Yes, and also someone who suffers from migraine seizures.
Okay.
Diagnosed. And they're just hammering at her. And then they announced their intention that they are going to take our license and bring it with them. They actually took the frame and we're going to take it off of our wall and take it with them. And at that point, my mother said, "Look, please, I just found out I have cancer. I'm going to have to have surgery. Please, can you just leave and come back?" Okay. And so they left. And then she immediately called the board and told them what had happened. We went down there that very day. We paid for the new one, paid the fee, and in fact, the executive of the board apologized to us for the behavior of her inspectors.
Would seem warranted.
So we thought, of course, the matter was clear. And then later, when was the hearing?
It was a couple of months later.
Okay.
Well, not too long. Let me take over here.
Sure.
Not too long after, we received a notice from the board that we were being brought before the board on formal charges. We were going to be having a formal hearing over not allowing the inspectors to do their inspection. And in fact, there was a total of 10 charges that were filed against us.
Which they only brought up evidence of one.
Well, at that formal hearing, I acted as our defense. Their inspector was the initial witness. This was all recorded by court reporters. At any rate, they gave what I thought was an unclear picture of the circumstances. When I did cross-examination, I think I clearly showed that her initial testimony was misleading. At no time did they address any of the charges other than that with not allowing the inspectors to do their jobs, and yet they found us guilty on all charges, even though the other charges were not even addressed in any manner during that hearing.
No evidence was brought forth, no testimony was given. They fined us with the fees. It was about $6,800 total, something like that.
Correct.
Well, let me ask you this. Congressman Gow, who, like I said, that was the former Congressman Gow, has appeared before the Senate Commerce Committee, and he has referenced the Cosmetology Board as basically being a loose cannon without any regard for administrative law, and that it's preset that you can try to put on a defense, but the decision is made beforehand. Would you all concur with Congressman Gow's observation in that regard?
I would say so.
Absolutely.
Especially since later on when we asked for what they have in our file on us, they told us that all that was gone. It wasn't even in there.
All the material that you were supposed to
No evidence of the fine.
All of the records of that hearing and for some period after that seems to have disappeared.
Wow.
Now that's what we were told. Whether it actually did or not, we don't know.
All right.
We asked to examine our file, and we were basically told that
clean.
most of that didn't exist anymore.
Well, let me just throw out one other thing that I found a little interesting here. As I've said, this is a beautiful establishment here, but your location is in somewhat close proximity to longtime chairman of the Cosmetology Board. Am I correct on that?
I'd say we're her closest competitor, actually.
You're her closest geographically?
Geographically.
Okay.
Yes.
Can, in terms of size, are y'all roughly compatible, or is that school much larger?
I don't know what her population is, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Her total population. I mean, we're just trying to run our school.
Exactly, but as I understand it, the things that kind of became big issues never seemed to have surfaced when you were over on Government Street, quite a ways away from where we are right now.
That's correct.
That's
All
why we
right.
never had
Fair
any
enough.
issues.
Fair enough.
I know, as far as the physical plant, we're a larger school than they are, and I believe our enrollment to be larger than theirs, but I couldn't quote any
Sure.
No.
statistics
That's
on
fine.
that.
That's fine.
But then, let's see, what was it? When did? Okay, in 2009, we received notice that we were going to have a hearing involving these complaints from former students. Now, based on our previous experience with the board, we said, okay, well, this time we better get representation.
Okay.
And we did get an attorney who informed us that the board is required by law to notify you of your complaint, tell you what the complaint is, give you an opportunity to answer, but they're also supposed to tell you what statutes you supposedly violated.
Correct.
Now, they scheduled a hearing for us twice, and our attorneys just don't show up. They haven't followed the law. And we didn't show up, and it went away because our attorney kept asking them, what statute did they violate? What law are they accused of violating? They could never provide that.
Okay.
And
Actually, on the one instance where they did provide us with charges, our attorney informed them that the charges they were filing against us were out of date. They were no longer in the current law.
Okay.
so yes, so I mean, basically, you're trying to charge something that had been changed years before.
Okay.
But also, I have an example. One of the students who they named, and I don't want to, throw a critter under the bus here, was so uncomfortable with what happened. She came to us, provided a copy of what she gave to the board. She told us that she didn't contact the board.
Okay.
The board contacted her
The board contacted her. All
and
right.
requested that they recruited her to make a complaint against us.
All right.
And in this complaint, all she does is she describes the process under which we followed federal law, because everything in here has to do with financial aid, federal financial aid,
All right.
which is not something the board even has purview over. And basically, all she does is describe what we did, where she was put on probation, didn't follow probation, and lost her financial aid. So
Okay.
basically, all she did was show that we followed the law.
Okay.
And they were going to have a hearing regarding this.
All
There's
right.
nothing in here about alleging any wrongdoing.
Okay. And I'd like to just, by the way, folks, we're going to provide a direct link for this, but I'd like to interject at this time because this is the same identical thing that Nelda Doral asserted that the board did with her, and the students really didn't refute it. When they got up to give their own testimony at Ms. Doral's hearing, they didn't dispute the fact. In fact, we've got footage of Nelda confronting Deborah Johnson about the fact that this sort of thing took place, and Ms. Johnson responded in the affirmative, that it did in fact take place.
Because it was a plot. It was an actually set down plot from the 2008 when they said, we're going to shut it down. Students started telling me they was going to shut me down 2 years before the plot developed. They don't want you there. One time, I had to call Miss Johnson, Deborah Johnson, because the students came to me and said that I called her and she called a meeting with the people in the office to say that another student had came and said that we don't like her. The board said they don't like her, get away from it. I have all the text messages I can provide y'all with from day one. Get away from her, the board does not like her. am I telling the truth? She called a meeting with them and told them, y'all stop tampering with this girl's school. Y'all leave this girl's school. This is very serious. A long.
So, given another instance of that, it looks like we're going to a pattern of behavior by this particular board. So I didn't steer you off, but I wanted to throw that in.
That's fine. And then, so basically, I guess that problem went away because we didn't show up. It was our understanding that if we had showed up, we would have basically accepted them violating the law.
All right, and when you say you didn't show up, I've been observing this board for about 3 years now, and what I've noticed is a propensity to, they'll have a category called guest, and they will have some item that they're going to discuss, and that individual or those individuals or that school is labeled as a, quote, guest, unquote. Is that what happened here, or did they do?
Oh, no, they invited us in for, this was not a guest situation.
Was not a guest situation, but
We received a notification of a hearing.
okay.
But in this case, our attorney informed us, since they did not follow the requirements of the law in the procedures for the notification,
Okay.
that it basically wasn't valid. So her legal advice to us was not to attend.
Yes, and she requested several times for them to say, what statute did the school violate?
Okay.
And so she said, don't show up.
I understand.
And it just, after that, I guess it just kind of went away.
Okay.
Until,
But correct me if I'm wrong, and the only reason I ask this is because I've been present a couple of times when this school has been discussed, and my recollection then was it was certainly under the guest category.
that came later.
That has occurred.
Okay, I wanted to make sure I wasn't dreaming
that
stuff
came,
up here.
That came later, where one time I was there on a completely unrelated, I don't remember what it was for. I was changing the hours. Okay,
okay.
Thank you.
Can you speak up just a little bit?
Okay, we were there to let the board know that we were changing our schedule.
Okay.
And and they had one of my former students who was withdrawn for academic reasons. Her grades were below what they should have been, below our graduation requirements. And they just kind of blindsided with me, and started asking me questions and all. And and after that we did try to cooperate. It turned into, actually there was 2 students who their grades were below what we require.
Okay.
Now, keep in mind the board has no purview over our policies and procedures or our grades, our grading. That's all approved at the federal level in order for us to have financial aid for the students. And basically, we provided the evidence. We showed them that these students did not meet the academic requirements. And they allowed the students to test for their license anyway.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but if this is the instance I'm recalling, she didn't pass your final exam. I know there was one student that was...
She didn't pass her final practical exam with us, yes. She wouldn't attend. She wouldn't show up at school on the days we were going to have it. And so you have no choice but to give her a 0. It's a requirement that they pass this. I mean, for the past 2 reporting years, something like 19 out of every 20 graduates of this school have passed the testing at the board.
Okay.
And that's phenomenal. That means
that's 95%.
Yeah, that's approximately. We go to decimals, but we're giving our students what they need.
Okay.
If you graduate from here, you're pretty much guaranteed almost to get your license, which is what school's supposed to do.
Right.
The law requires a student to complete and graduate from a school in order to be able to test for their license.
Okay.
And so they went ahead and let these 2 students test anyway. One of them, from what I understand, passed and is practicing, even though she never graduated.
Okay.
I, in a meeting, told them that this is a slap to the face of every student of any school who has ever busted their butt and done what they want. These students are in here something like 30 hours a week, a lot of them single moms, working jobs, and they bust their tail to get through this. And you're going to let someone who refused to put in the effort do it. And that's just wrong.
Right.
Then there was another one where they basically tried to play the same game, where it even got worse. And we've got recording, we've got video on all this, where we actually present the board members with the law. And they just flat out ignore it. Where I question their attorney about the law, and she just completely ignores me.
Would that attorney have been Cangelosi or Morris, since they have the 2 of them, or do you recall?
That was Morris.
That was Morris, okay.
Okay. This student, not only did they allow her to test, even though she didn't graduate from us, they told her she didn't have to pay us what she contractually owed.
I remember that. I was there for that.
Now,
in fact, they gave you the specific dollar amount that they were going to
allow
you
to pay us.
to. Exactly. Now, there are a number of boards and commissions that have fault, obviously, but I can tell you that the real estate commission, this is basically equivalent to getting into a dispute over commissions at the real estate commission, and they will flat tell you they're not going to get involved. And yet, here we have this board going out of its way to jump into an area that it has absolutely no jurisdiction over. And I don't mean to take over, but I want to say one other thing with that regard. Nelda DeRile's attorney, Mr. Landry, he emphasized at the outset of her so-called hearing that every single element that was being presented, and again, I want to emphasize that many of these were gone out and recruited by the board, that to the extent they had any legitimate beef with Mr. Rowell and or her school, it should fall under a civil litigation matter, not a licensing matter.
All right, well, one thing we know for sure is she's been in business for, I think, 12 years. She's been, more than 12 years she's been in business. There have been very few, if any, significant complaints against her. Now, one thing that I think is very consistent in the testimony that we heard previously and the testimony we heard today is that, you know, some students don't want to pay what they owe. And, you know, if they owe her money, as Mr. Frazier owed money, continued to owe money, and he said he had no complaints about the school. He was very specific about that. He said the only thing he had a problem with is the fact that he owed some money. There was a dispute over the money that he owed. There's money owed by most of these people. Some of them have quit, some of them have decided they don't want to come back. Some people got disgruntled for whatever reason.
There again, if there's somehow some belief that the student got cheated out of money or didn't get hours or things of that nature, you know, that would be a civil matter here, and yet they're without any provocation whatsoever, they're going out of their way to say, look, here's what you're going to do, and you're only going to charge X amount.
And they're even trying to check and make sure, I handled financial aid, that I did write her financial aid.
Mm.
Again, financial aid, that's federal. And we are audited every year by the Department of Education. We pass our audits. You know, that's up to them. In fact, the same student reported us to the federal authorities over us, our accrediting body.
All right.
Our accrediting body investigated the situation and found gave us a letter saying that they found no problems.
All right.
We presented that to the board and they ignored it.
All right.
So basically the student's accusing of something that falls under federal purview. Federal authorities investigated and said, you're clear, and they took it upon themselves to say that, no, the student is right, she doesn't have to pay you what she did. She still hasn't paid us, and they still let her test.
All right.
Which a student is required to have clearance by law. They are required to have a zero balance in order to test. So it's just, and they've slandered us. They literally called us in public forum, they called us a liar at one point, called my mother a liar, saying that, we're doing this student wrong. And it's like they wanted us to bend our rules. Well, let her come back and finish or whatever like this. I'm like, no, because it doesn't matter if the student is close to graduation or in the middle of her course. You have to follow the rules and regulations. And if you disrespect the staff members that we have, that's an expellable offense.
Okay.
And so you're telling me that today I can have a student do this and I shouldn't expel her because she's close to graduation. But tomorrow, if another student does this, if they're in the middle class, it's okay to expel them.
Well, and I like to say, one of the things here is, and we've addressed this issue with the board, state law requires school to be accredited.
Okay.
Under our rules of accreditation, and there are a number of standards which we are required to meet to maintain that accreditation, but one of them requires consistent treatment of our students.
Yes.
So if someone doesn't meet whatever the requirements are, we can't just decide we're going to allow it or disallow it. We have to be consistent with that treatment.
Correct.
And yet the board is saying,
We want you to be inconsistent.
absolutely.
And they're going to penalize us for following federal law.
All right. Well, I think our viewers at this point have been able to definitively ascertain that the Shalacy's have some legitimate beefs with this board, and they join a number of other folk who fit that same category. But in wrapping up what may very well be segment one into a multi-segment feature, would y'all like to just make some concluding remarks or anything else?
I'd like to say, look, first of all, I already said how successful we are getting our graduate's license.
Yes.
Which is, it doesn't matter if a student graduates if they can't license. Licensing is what's key.
Right.
You can't work without license. All that we've ever wanted to do is run the best school we are able to, and within the bounds of the law.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no idea why we've been singled out or harassed, but we even brought this problem to the Inspector General's office.
Ah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's one other item. It was brought up to the Inspector General. Now, folks, those of you who have followed Sound Off Louisiana know my opinions of the Inspector General, and they aren't very flattering, shall we say that. So I guess
In multiple meetings with her, we provided all the evidence, video, audio, written. You know, and she kept talking, oh yeah, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Finally, something like over a year later, from when we started, you know, I called, you know, hey, is there an update on, you know, what's going on? And she said, yeah, you know, we think this is just a mild administrative issue. They are refusing to even publish a report.
wow. And that kind of goes back to what I've said about Stephen Street having a letter that I am convinced he got a patent on, saying, you know, after thorough review, our office could find no evidence of wrongdoing and we are closing our file. I am convinced he got a patent on that letter. So
I even at one point, because you know, the Board of Cosmetology, they answer to the governor's office.
correct.
I called the governor's office.
Ah, okay. Did you get anywhere when going to the governor?
They told me that they were not going to do anything, and in fact, they were going to, if I called them with a complaint and anything, all they were going to do is call the board and let them know that this individual has a problem with y'all.
Okay.
So basically, no, they won't do, which is, you know, like if you go to an employee supervisor over their treatment to you and the supervisor just saying, no, we're not going to do anything.
Well, I think the conclusion as to where that's going to go is somewhat obvious.
Yes, I would say so. And look, it goes without saying, those of you who follow the Sound Off Louisiana blog know my sentiments on Governor Edwards. But you know, it's disheartening that the number of people from so many different occupational licensing boards have had beefs that they have taken. I could start naming names, trust me, only to be told that in some instances, look, there's nothing we can do. That's not the way the former Edwards, the first Edwards ran things. He pretty much took the bull by the horns. For whatever reason, Governor John Bell Edwards, with regard to occupational licensing problems, seems to be, and I'm going to be as polite as I know how to be, extremely passive. So I guess with that, unless you have any other thing you'd like to add in, we will kind of conclude this as the first segment, and I believe we're going to have another segment coming up, because we're going to see there may be some interesting developments, especially given that board meeting later this afternoon. So is there any last thing you may like to say in closing, and we'll consider this the end of segment one?
All right. I think we've covered the highlights.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, I want to appreciate you.
We appreciate
Ed
it.
Thank you
Shalacy,
very much.
Paul Shalacy, once again, the owners of DJays Cosmetology Institute. They run a very fine school. I've had the honor of coming and touring the facility. And so we're going to see if we can't do something to expose what they have joined a long list of folks who have problems with the Cosmetology Board. Once again, this is Robert Burns. We look forward to bringing you another edition of Sound Off Louisiana in the very near future. Thank you once again.